Okay, I'm going to talk about how to derive the unit circle, how to get all the degree values, all the radian values, and then ultimately the terminal points. So let's start with radians. So with radians, there are multiple families. There's the pi over 4 family, the pi over 6 family, and the pi over 3 family. All can get driven by just pretty much counting around the unit circle as long as you know how to count with your fractions. We're going to start with the pi over 4 family. They start at the base here, and that is a value of 0. The pi over 4 family cuts each quadrant in half. So we're going to go up to the halfway mark, and we're going to put pi over 4. And then we go to our next major axis there, and that's 2 pi over 4, which simplifies to pi over 2. Then a halfway between that, we get 3 pi over 4. And then we come down to halfway again, and we get 4 pi over 4, or pi. And then halfway again, 5 pi over 4. Go down to your next axis, that's 6 pi over 4, which simplifies to 3 pi over 2. And then cut the quadrant in half again, we get 7 pi over 4. All the ones in green are the pi over 4 family. The ones I put in red are in green, black, are going to be part of the other families as well. So they help you derive the other parts. So pi over 6 is the next one we're going to talk about. We go up our first slot, and that is pi over 6. We go to the next missing one, and we get 2 pi over 6, which simplifies to pi over 3. We count our black as 3 pi over 6. Go to the next slot. That's 4 pi over 6, which simplifies to 2 pi over 3. Go to the next slot. That's going to be 5 pi over 6. Pi is 6 pi over 6. Then we come to the next one, and that's 7 pi over 6. Skip our 5 pi over 4. Go down, that's 8 pi over 6, which simplifies to 4 pi over 3. Come down, 3 pi over 2 is really going to be 9 pi over 6. The next spot is 10 pi over 6, which simplifies to 5 pi over 3. And then our last slot, we just did 10, so it's going to be 11 pi over 6. And when we come back to the beginning, we're at 2 pi. So there's our radians broken down. Now we're going to talk about the degrees. As we go around the circle, the big spaces are 30, the little spaces are 15. So we start at 0, we add 30, so 30 degrees, and then we add 15, so 45, and then we add 15 again, we get 60. Big gap, we add 30, so that's 90 at the top. Big gap again, we add 30, so that's 120. Little gap, we add 15, so 135. Little gap, add 15, 150. Big gap, add 30, 180. Big gap, add 30, 210. Little gap, add 15, 225. Little gap, add 15, 240. Big gap, add 30, so 270. Big gap, add 30, 300. Little gap, add 15, 315. And little gap, add 15, 330. And then we're back at the beginning, which is actually 360. So there is our degrees and our radians. Our terminal points actually go back to right triangles, and if you want to know specifically where those come from, just stop by and ask me some questions. I'm just going to tell you what the points are and show you and remind you of some tricks that we could use. So all of the ones in black are in the radius of the circle, which the radius of the unit circle is 1. So that means we're going 1 in the x direction, so its terminal point is 1, 0. We went up 1 vertically, so that terminal point for 90 and pi over 2 is 0, 1. We went to the left 1 there, so at pi it is negative 1, 0. And down here at 3 pi over 2 and 270, it is 0, negative 1. Okay, those are our terminal points there for in the black. Now in the red, this is our pi over 6 family. Its terminal point is really the same. We just have to remember what values are positive and negative dependent on their quadrant. So in quadrant number 1, remember everything is positive. In quadrant number 2, x is negative, y is positive. In quadrant number 3, they are both negative. And in quadrant number 4, x is positive, y is negative. So for pi over 6, our terminal point is the square root of 3 over 2, comma 1/2. So everywhere I have my red, or my pi over 6 family, it follows that. In quadrant number 2 here at 5 pi over 6, the first term is just going to be negative. So it's negative square root of 3 over 2, comma 1/2. In the third quadrant, 7 pi over 6, both terms are negative. So we've got negative square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. And in the fourth quadrant, the first term is positive, the second term is negative. So we got square root of 3 over 2, negative 1/2. All right, for all the green, this is our pi over 4 family. Its terminal point is the square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. So in quadrant number 2 at 3 pi over 4 and 135, it's going to be negative square root of 2 over 2, square root of 2 over 2. In quadrant number 3, they are both now negative. So 5 pi over 4 and 225 is negative square root of 2 over 2, negative square root of 2 over 2. Going to the fourth quadrant, 7 pi over 4 and 315, the first term is positive, so square root of 2 over 2. And the second term is negative, negative square root of 2 over 2. The last family here in blue is our pi over 3 family. And their terminal point is 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. And again, we just make positive and negative depending on what quadrant it is. So 2 pi over 3 and 120 are going to be negative 1/2 square root of 3 over 2. 4 pi over 3 and 240 are going to be negative 1/2, negative square root of 3 over 2. And 5 pi over 3 or 300 is going to be 1/2, negative square root of 3 over 2. So realistically, if you can remember the first quadrant, you can really understand this unit circle. There is the hand trick which if you want to see that, please ask me in class so that I can explain it a little bit better. And there's also the counting trick. So if you look at quadrant number 1, and you start up at the top at pi over 3, the tops go 1, 2, 3, and then go to the y's 1, 2, 3. Right? They count up. Um, if you have further questions, please ask me. Remember, you do have to have this memorized, so I suggest note cards, um, rewriting the circle multiple times to help you study it. If you have further questions, please see me in class.